Hello, everyone. This lecture is about danger to self or suicide risk. So suicide assessment and intervention are ethical and standards of care issues. Okay, so this means there are ethical codes that tell us that we should assess for suicide and intervene, and they're considered to be things that are consistent with the standard of care. There isn't a law per se that says that we assess for suicide and intervene. Okay, so what is step one with suicide assessment? Step one is to complete a thorough assessment. If you are concerned that a client might be a danger to themselves, you should start with a thorough assessment. This is what you want to select. If there's an exam that describes some risk, but it's unclear how imminent the risk is, you want to select the answer that talks about assessing further. You don't want to assume that suicidal means extreme risk or automatically necessitates an involuntary hospitalization. That is the most extreme intervention. Okay? There are many people who operate in their daily lives with constant thoughts about suicide, but they don't actually have intent to act out on those thoughts. So we don't want to jump to conclusions. We don't want to make assumptions. If we're not sure and the vignette doesn't provide us enough information or the client doesn't provide us enough information, we want to start with a thorough assessment. Okay, in real life and in an exam, you want to pay attention to in real life and an exam, you want to pay close attention to heightened warning signs. So things like hopelessness, past history of suicide attempts, and social isolation are warning signs or red flags for suicide risk. So in those cases, again, in real life or on an exam, if you see those things, you want to assess for suicide, okay? Now, in clinical settings, you can also use a suicide risk assessment tool. There's lots of them, but remember that these are not a replacement for a thorough assessment and your clinical judgment. So what exactly are we assessing for when we do the suicide assessment? Essentially, there's four things. First, ideation. These are the thoughts about killing oneself, thoughts about death. So things like, sometimes I wish I was dead, right? Note that this is different in intensity from I can't bear it anymore, I want to die. Okay, so ideation exists on a continuum, right? And the desire to commit suicide or the desire to die moves us toward intent as opposed to just thoughts. Okay? So intent is an intent to follow through with thoughts or ideation. I want to kill myself to end this pain would be more intent heavy than just ideation. A plan, obviously, is a plan for how and when to kill the self. So I will overdose on pills and wash it down with vodka. Of course, the more lethal the plan, the greater the risk. Something like running into the freeway is much more lethal than something like I'm going to stop taking my insulin, right? Both will ultimately result in death, right? But the lethality is a little bit different. Same thing if someone says, I'm going to kill myself today versus 10 years from now, right? So this isn't to say that we downplay anything, but we do want to make an assessment of how significant the level of risk is, how imminent it is. Okay, and then finally, means and opportunity. Do they have the access or means to carry out their plan, right? So someone who says that they plan to shoot themselves but has no idea about how to go about getting a gun, has no plan necessarily to do that, doesn't necessarily have means, whereas someone who says, I've saved up enough pills to kill myself with, or I bought a gun and will use it to shoot myself, does have means and opportunity. Okay, so clients that are talking to you about having looked up on the internet how many of this particular pill to take or what the most lethal way of doing this or that is, that would express means, plan, opportunity, and a higher risk. Okay, so once you've done a thorough assessment, you can then intervene at the appropriate level. Your intervention, just like the risk itself, should exist on a continuum that takes the risk, your judgment, and the client's characteristics into account. okay? The guidelines that I'm going to provide you with are helpful for addressing risk and giving you an idea of which answers might be appropriate on an exam or how you should intervene based on what you're seeing. But of course, they're not a step-by-step list. They're not a cookbook. They're not the end-all be-all of interventions for suicide. So take them for what they are. So what is level 1 intervention? So what I consider level 1 intervention is a client who has ideation, thoughts only, but no intent, plans, or means. And this is pretty common. So in these cases, what is recommended is that you process the thoughts in session, start working on developing a crisis plan that includes coping skills that the client can use to work toward reducing some of those thoughts. Activating their social support network, helping them to reach out to those that they find supportive, or to start building a support network if they don't have one through things like support groups, and potentially increasing your contact with the client. So maybe seeing them twice a week instead of once a week or something like that, or phone sessions or something like that. Level 2, if we move up, is now adding in the intent. So I think about dying and I want to die, or I want to kill myself, but still no means or plan. In this case, you do everything from the first one, but then you add to it. In this case, I would suggest activating and contacting the support network. If it's a parent, a spouse, a friend, whomever, so that they can be on board with helping to keep the client safe, so that it doesn't solely fall upon you who see them once a week, but they have someone else helping the client as well. Increasing contact to probably daily, in most cases, either by phone or in session, to continue to assess and to monitor and see if anything worsens. If there are potential means, even though the client maybe has not expressed them, you want to enlist the help of the support person to remove any potential means. So for example, a teen who has access to their medication, you're going to have the parent remove the medication from their access, or get a lockbox or something like that. Now, if in doing your assessment and planning your safety planning and creating your crisis plan and all of that, the intent doesn't resolve, like they're still saying, I want to kill myself, then you need to progress to level 3. Or if you at any point don't feel comfortable, you're worried that this person's going to carry out those thoughts, trust your gut, okay, and intervene further. But before we go there, let's talk about safety planning. So what is a safety plan? Basically, in a safety plan, a therapist and their client collaborate in developing a personalized safety plan. This isn't a template that you print out and they sign. It's not a no harm contract or a no suicide contract. Those aren't helpful. This is a tool that is designed to assist the client in weathering the storm of suicidal thoughts and impulses, and accessing their supports that they need to help keep them safe, or to reach out for more help if they can't. Things to include in a safety plan: list of reasons why they want to continue living. What are the things that keep them going, that motivate them, that help them to think, okay, maybe dying isn't a good idea, right? So things like kids, family, career aspirations, their faith, anything like that. Identify self-soothing behaviors or coping strategies. What makes them feel better? What lifts their mood? Exercise, music, writing, watching something funny, whatever it is that works for them. Listing the names and phone numbers of their support network, people that they can call, friends, family, other helpers in their life, their pastor, their youth group, whatever, anybody that they think could be a resource to them. And then finally, phones and numbers to emergency suicide prevention resources like the 24-hour crisis lines. If you at your agency have a 24-hour line, including that, adding your number in here or your supervisor's number, whatever the agency policy is for you. All of those things should be here. You should keep a copy for yourself, give one to your client, and they should be able to use that to help them. Okay, level 3, if we get to the point where they have ideation, they have intent, they have a means, or they have a plan, or this intent just seems really concerning, then you of course do the other things, but then you want to start to discuss and normalize voluntary hospitalization as an option, okay? Helping the client to understand and be okay with the idea that they might need a little extra help, and exploring if they're willing and if that's a possibility. Assuming that they are, you follow through with that and facilitate that process. If they don't want to be hospitalized, but you are really concerned, you then have the option of an involuntary hospitalization, which in California is a 5150 for adults, a 5585 for minors. Remember, this is the most extreme intervention. You are taking the client's rights away here. So only choose this if the other options have been exhausted and the client's unwilling to do anything else and you're concerned about imminent risk. All right, so let's look at a sample question that you might see on an exam related to danger to self. So you're treating a 17-year-old female with a history of major depressive disorder and self-harming behaviors, cutting. During one session, she tells you that she got into a huge fight with her best friend and feels hopeless. She says everyone would be better off without her. You know that this client has access to prescription antidepressants and is home alone often. Okay, so here are answer choices. A, contact her father immediately to discuss voluntary hospitalization. B, assess further for danger to self. C, discuss issuing a 5585 with the client. And D, complete a safety plan with client and her father. So take a minute, pick an answer, and then we'll discuss. Okay, so what's helpful here, the best kind of place to start is to assess the level of risk. So without reading any further into the vignette, don't add stuff into there that isn't there. We know that there's some suicidal ideation. She said she says everyone would just be better off without me. So that already is some kind of ideation. And we have the hopelessness. And remember, the hopelessness is a warning sign in exam questions and in real life that something needs to be assessed further, that we need to assess further for a danger, okay? It's unclear in this vignette if there's a plan or a means, okay? The means mentioned is a suspicion, right, of the therapist. We know that the client has antidepressants. Could this be a means? It hasn't quite been confirmed by the client, but it's a concerning enough suspicion that we want to find out more. So in this case, we would need to start with step one, which is to assess further. We have some unanswered questions. We don't know how imminent this risk is. Is the saying, everyone would be better off without me, is that just a way of expressing her grief and her sadness? Or is that an actual desire to follow through with hurting herself, right? So we would start with the step one of assess, complete a thorough assessment. So knowing that, we look at the answers and we can see that the appropriate answer, the best answer is B, assess further for danger to self. You want to do that before you move to any of the other options, okay? For A, contact her father immediately to discuss voluntary hospitalization. We need to wait. We can't do this yet. We need to know how serious is the risk. It's possible that we can implement a least restrictive option. Might we still contact dad? Sure. Will it be to discuss voluntary? Maybe, maybe not. So we don't want to jump to a restrictive option like that before we've done a thorough assessment. So A is inappropriate, could be a follow-up step maybe later. C, discuss issuing a 5585 with the client. This is an extreme intervention. You're talking involuntary hospitalization when you haven't done an assessment, you haven't contacted her dad, her support network, anyone, you haven't tried a safety plan, and you haven't even considered if voluntary is an option. So totally not an okay answer right now. And then D, this would be an appropriate plan perhaps after the assessment if you determine that the risk is manageable, that it can be handled at home, if dad's on board to help out with the safety and to secure the antidepressants, and the client's willing to complete a safety plan with you and so on. This would be a great option. But before you can go here, you need to assess further. B, B, B. Assess further, figure out what you're dealing with before you go into crisis reaction mode. All right, so that is it. Let me know if you have questions. Hope this was helpful. Thanks, everyone.